Hello?
Hey Matt.
Hey,
Hey man. How you doing?
I'm all right. I'm all right. Hanging in
Mhm.
there. How are you?
Great. I'm great. I'm great. Thanks for squeezing me in. I'm sure you're really busy.
Well, it's not squeezing in at all. It's just a little bit chaotic with the people, people just like put things on my calendar and just happens.
Right.
But anyway,
Yeah. Yeah. I get it. No, I get it. Yeah, totally. It's been a while since I saw you, and I think that would probably have been like maybe two reunions ago because I didn't go to the last one. Or
okay.
yeah, yeah. So I appreciate you kind of coming back. I feel like there's a certain privilege people have with each other when they've known each other since they were 14 years old. And I feel like you're kind of granting me that privilege.
For sure. You've earned it by just having to suffer me for that.
But I do remember us as preps together very much, and that was some time back. Like I'm randomly calling you after probably 7 years since I've seen you in person. And so, it's actually really cool because you got right back to me and you said, yeah, let's do this and let's meet. And so that's awesome, dude. And I totally appreciate it.
No, happy to do it. It'll be good fun.
Me too. I think so too. What do you think? Like, paint the canvas for me. Like, what's exciting to you? What do you want to talk about?
Well, I mean, I think your ideas about well, talk a little bit about, the experience that we had at Exeter, how I remember it and what I took away from it. I mean, I think that background and such is important. Where did it lead you and why? How do you get where you are? And you can maybe you start at kind of it towards the end where you start like here's Matt and this is what he's doing today.
Hmm.
And then you can kind of circle back and go back in time to say, okay, so how did we get here?
Okay.
Right?
I like that.
Yesterday I was arguing in the Supreme Court, and so how did we get here from Main Street Hall in September of 1988?
Yes,
Um,
exactly. I
right? And
remember
like
you very
when you look
well.
with the kind of collection of reprobates and criminals that
Yes, I
populated
know.
the Main Street Hall in 1988, how did um and one of the things I would want to talk about is, just I the most amazing thing I got out of Exeter was this group of friends from Main Street that we
Yeah.
still stick together. We still get together once a year, 11 of us.
Wow.
And, last year we got together in LA, and this year we're going to Curacao.
Amazing.
David Correa's, uh, homeland. Um, So talking about like, and it was something about, not just Exeter, but Main Street in particular that just forged this bond among our group in a way that, I found to be pretty unique. And then, that we show up to our reunions in tracksuits,
Exactly. I know. It's hilarious.
right? I can give you some good pictures,
Oh,
tracksuit
I would love that.
pictures from the.
Please do. I would love to do that.
What's
I'll
your
put,
phone number? I'm just going to
yeah,
shoot you a picture here.
please do. 415-3096.
3096. Okay. All right, so go ahead.
Okay. The way I think about this is this phone conversation is like a warm up. And there's a couple of things you said here where if the audio is good enough, I might try to even grab that little blurb where you start with the best thing about Exeter was my relationships and my 11, the 11 guys, and we get together every year. I could see that being like an opening, like the opener, right, to the whole thing.
Yeah.
And then we get into, because I remember you were from Pelham, because I would go home with Gorley and we would see you
Yeah.
kind of, and we would share rides and stuff like that. And I know you guys shared rides with each other and talk about like life in Pelham before Exeter and then getting to Exeter and then what was it like and being a 4-year senior and all that. And then exactly what you said, like, what did it mean to me and what did I take away from it? And how did it kind of take me to where I am today? I see this now. Jesus Christ. Look at this thing. What the is this? Man, this picture of you guys at the Packers game is awesome. I love this. This
Oh
must be you
yeah.
went to stay with Pablo, right? He lives in Wisconsin.
This is one of our yearly get-togethers, and we went
Yeah.
to the Packers. So we rented a house in Green Bay, and we
Okay.
went to the Packers game.
It might even be fun to talk about these pictures. So if you have others, send them over. This is incredible, man. Like this is like beyond my expectation. This is the
Oh
exact
yeah.
stuff I'm talking about. I do want to cover your career, and I think what you're doing is amazing. I want to hear all about it. And I want you to like give the kids something too. Like,
Yeah, for sure.
right, that they can be exposed to. But I also, now that I'm talking to you and we're going through all of this, and by the way, this is just tremendous. There's a whole other set of things, and I hope you don't mind if we do go long. And if we do go long,
I don't
I
mind.
don't know if we need to do like Joe Rogan 3 hours, but I do think like the whole point of this medium, right, is to have like a real conversation, like two old friends. And I think it could be really fun and powerful for other people to hear this. I don't know, like, when you go to reunions, don't you find it awkward? Like, I find it like so emotional and awkward at the same time, and just kind of like rushed. And I remember walking away from the last one with Tinio and driving back to Boston with her and just feeling like I didn't even want it to stop. I didn't want it to end.
It always does. It always feels rushed and very compressed.
Right?
Right? For like, it's like for the amount of catching up that needs to be done with the
Exactly.
number of people that you properly would want to catch up with, you would need
Right.
several days, right? Like instead, what you do, it's almost like you get it's almost like speed dating, right? It's like you bounce around from person to person and get a 5-minute update on the life of somebody, and it's hard to actually get.
Yeah.
If you do end up in like a 45-minute, hour-long conversation with somebody, it's great, but it comes at a cost. The cost is that you didn't get to talk to anybody else.
Yeah. That is such a great point. That is such a great point. I think that is so true. That is so true. It's almost painful, right? That's how I experienced it. That's exactly how I felt. And then also the other part of this too is because, okay, to your point, like you're close to the Main Street guys. I think a lot of us were close to the people that we were in dorms with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But not everyone, right? But yeah.
Not really everyone. I mean, you guys are pretty tight knit, but to me, that's actually pretty extraordinary.
But the 6 4-year seniors, like we've stuck together since 1988.
So let me see if I can name them. That's Eric, you, Ben, Reardon. Let's see.
So it was Ben, me, Logan, Brasco, Reardon, and Pablo.
Yeah, got it. It'll just kind of be a conversation, right? And this this sort of prep meeting just helps me to flesh out how to guide it, and I'll do my best to just try to ask questions. Part of my goal is to like make sure I'm asking good questions that are more open-ended, right? And that's just like a really compelling thing that people would want to listen to. Just like, just exactly like Terry Gross does on NPR is what I'm hoping, to try to rise to in terms of how good this could be. So then I think like we'll cover your career and your family too. And like maybe whatever else you're interested in. Is there anything else that comes to mind that you feel like just in terms of expressing yourself to talk about your life, Exeter and otherwise, that comes up for you?
Like I've got a kid who's a full-time, my oldest kid is a full-time tennis player who doesn't go to school.
Oh, really?
Who she does online school and she
Really?
travels all the time. She's
Oh.
leaving for Costa Rica on Friday for 2 weeks.
Mhm.
So
Is
she's
she
like
pro? Like a pro, kind of going pro type?
not like she'll play in college.
Okay.
But I mean, she was in hotels like something like 130 nights last year.
Oh my
I mean,
God.
it's ridiculous amount of travel.
Wow.
So that's like something that's an interesting feature of our lives. And then one of the kind of unusual things I do, and unusual in the space of like working at a big corporate law firm, is
Mhm.
I represent victims of terrorism in cases mostly against the government of Iran. Pretty much every major terrorism incident in the last, 40 years. I represented victims of the 1983 Marine Corps barracks bombing, 1998 U.S. Embassy bombings, the bombing of the USS Cole in 2000,
Mm.
and on and on. So that's kind of an unusual aspect of my
that's
practice.
super interesting. And then I guess it might be fun to talk about how you met your wife and
Oh yeah, that's like a law nerd story for sure.
Cool,
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, and so I think
She's a lawyer.
Oh, is
She's
she?
a lawyer. Yeah.
Awesome. This is
So
cool.
we met when we were working for different judges on the same court.
Oh, that's the other thing I saw on your LinkedIn. So you clerked for John Roberts, right? Can we talk about that? I think that would be cool. So there's a lot here. And from where would you prefer to do it?
I'd probably do it from the office.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
so we could look at like maybe the week of Feb 3.
Okay. When
Yeah.
were you thinking?
5 sounds good to
5 year
me,
time?
but
5 year time? Okay. So
yeah.
5 year time, then
Yeah. You could also do like you could do group podcasts. Like your heart like kind of like your Harkness idea, but you could get a group of like, Main Street people together or
uh-huh.
Webster or Abbott or whatever. You could do it.
I would love to do that. That's a great idea. Now, that would be so cool to just get the Main Street guys on because I know you're notorious now. I mean, like, oh, those guys are so cool. They come out in their tracksuits.
What will they wear next year?
Yeah. I kind of think that would be a lot of fun, actually. You've given me some really great ideas today. That's an outstanding idea. So let me see. So we've got February 3rd in the books here. This is going to be so great. Yeah, let's do that. I mean, let's get the Main Street guys on. And I mean, I think you're like helping me kick this off helps tremendously, Matt. It really does. I think it's going to be super fun and cool, and people are going to like it. And then just hearing you talk about the relationships, and everybody's going to have some version of that, I think. And that's what this is all about. So we'll just kind of go around the world with the whole thing.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, bye. So, Matt, I have to say, like, you are a sport. I don't know how much time we've spent in technical difficulty, but between the first time we met about a month ago and just now, I think it's a good hour and a half to 2 hours of futzing around with technologies and Wi-Fi's and phones and computers just to get you on camera recording here.
Get 2 cans and a string would have been better.
I think my lesson is if you're a lawyer at a Washington law firm where you're regularly in front of the Supreme Court, your IT department is going to lock your computer down, right?
Or if you're a lawyer, there's a reason you're a lawyer and not a tech savant.
Exactly. I guess so. Well, I appreciate you so much for coming on, and it just is so cool to like be able to talk to you. I have wanted to speak to you for a long time because I know that every year you go back to Exeter and do this annual Supreme Court review in front of the kids, right? So how many years have you been doing that now?
I mean, I didn't do it last year, but I think I had done it for about 10 years in a row. Prior to that, there was a scheduling mix-up last year, so I'm looking forward to getting back on the calendar there and doing it. It's a fun 22 minutes. 22 minutes of pure adrenaline, Vivek. That's how we do it.
Man, I gotta just stop for a second and just remark, because having known you when we were 14, like I have a full picture of Matt McGill at 14. Okay. And I remember prep year together, and I remember a lot of the Main Street guys from that time. Pablo, and I spent a lot of time together on the track team, and Ben and I were friends, and Reardon went to Mexico with me, and a bunch of other people, right? And all you guys, Frasca, all you guys. I mean, and I don't mean to leave anyone out, because I'm just sort of saying that to see one of my friends from school turn into, and you'll forgive me for this because this might be embarrassing, but kind of a big shot Supreme Court lawyer is kind of a big deal to me.
Well, I don't think I'm even close to, among our Main Street guys. I mean, it's trustee Eric Logan. That's it. That's the guy you left out, Joe Frasca's retired. I'd like to be retired, So it's been fun to watch how we all have turned out in our own way.
Yeah.
It was not something that you would have predicted based on, the body of work in Main Street Hall. You might have predicted prison, but not, trustee of the academy and general counsel of public companies and things like that.
I mean, that's the funny thing about it, right? It sort of goes without saying, when you look at Exeter alums, a lot of them are doing very impressive things, and a lot of those folks are in the public, and some aren't, and there's nonetheless still doing kind of amazing things to, whether it's public or not. And I think that's kind of always what I see when I look at the alumni mag, or, for you, like when I would see you go up in front of the school every year to talk about your thoughts on that year's Supreme Court docket. It just leaves you with this impression of awe, like, wow, like these people are all like super smart, of course, and hardworking and capable, and have kind of achieved this set of things all in different parts of life and industry, but nonetheless have each kind of taken a path where they've excelled. And it's hard not to be somewhat in awe of that. Frasca, you talk about Frasca. So I'm in the tech industry, right? And so Joe, and of all places in the world, to go to Canada to do this is crazy to me. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. To jump onto Shopify in the beginning, before it became this enormous e-commerce internet company, right? That literally powered every single e-commerce website that isn't Amazon, right? Like that's pretty cool. And then, just kind of everybody, Nick Dom, I guess, he's a judge now, right?
Judge Dom. He is the law.
He is the law, right? So he is the law, and you argue in front of the law is probably the difference. Is that what
I mean, that's one way to put it. Yeah.
So I have a ton of things I want to talk to you about, Matt, and it's so cool to be able to see you today. So thanks again. I have all kinds of memories. So one is just, I think I caught one of these rides with John Gorley from Pelham with you when we were getting out of Pelham to get back up to Exeter one time. And he told me this story because I talked to him a few weeks ago, and I told him, I said, I'm going to talk to Matt soon, and he goes, oh my God. I have this story about getting late to the bus, and his mom was flat out at 90 miles an hour trying to get us to the next connection up in Stamford. Otherwise she was going to drive us 6 hours north to Exeter. So that was something he told me about. Do you remember that story?
No, I don't. One of the things I love about getting together with classmates is everybody's got their own set of stories. And if you put them all together, you get this great mosaic, right? So, and my experience has been, we remember the stories that we tell. You remember the stories that you tell other people. I guess that was not something I was probably embarrassed at the time. I didn't mention my mom, driving it flat out. But
right.
John Gorley, he probably told his parents about it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, because I know
maybe you should drive next time, Dad.
Right. Well, I just remember going down there with him to Pelham, and I know you both were from Pelham, and my, experience as a Midwesterner on the East Coast for the first time in my life, this idea that there's the big city, right, Manhattan, and then there's Westchester, and that these two experiences of New York are totally different. I never knew what Westchester was, and so I would go to Thanksgiving with him.
Yeah.
But I just remember Pelham is this sleepy little town, and it's like a quick train ride into Manhattan, and then you have this whole universe, like this completely different universe that you're walking into.
Yeah, it's 29-minute train ride to Grand Central Station. A lot of the growing up, a lot of the parents, they worked in Manhattan. They rode that train every day into Grand Central. My dad was one of them, and they'd come out, take that train home. Lots of people still, lots of people still live that way.
It's a whole lifestyle, that Northeast corridor. So was your dad a lawyer too?
My dad was a lawyer. He's a retired lawyer now. He lives in Vero Beach, Florida. He's a tax avoiding liberal New Yorker, MSNBC watching New Yorker who moved to Florida, but he's down in Vero, and he was a labor and employment lawyer at a small firm in Manhattan in a building that is attached to Grand Central Station. So he had his commute was 29 minutes plus, 2-minute walk and 1 elevator.
Amazing. I want to know how we got you to Exeter. So how did you actually end up is the first question.
Yeah. So I was a pretty unhappy kid in junior high school, and my parents, started exploring other schools, private schools around Pelham. But my mother had my mom was the oldest of 5, and her 3 youngest siblings all had gone to Northfield Mount Hermon.
Really?
And Then her brother Jack had gone to Harvard. So through that, my mother had like exposure to this New England boarding school cult. Um, so, my mom sent away for, a ton of what, we called them catalogs back in the day. And these glossy brochures from all the New England boarding schools, all the big ones, and then a bunch of ones that, I had never heard of. I hadn't heard of any of them at the time. It was not something that was even remotely on my radar screen. But then, I went around and I looked at the schools, and I quickly became pretty impressed with like the I was overawed by the facilities, and and the way I got to Exeter was like the stupidest way possible, which was like I became completely transfixed by the fact that the library had 9 floors. And the gym had 12 squash courts and 2 hockey rinks. Like I didn't play squash or hockey, never did. And we barely set foot in that library until maybe junior year. I went there for like all the wrong reasons, right? It wasn't because of the Harkness method. It wasn't because of having some other connection to the school. I was just overawed by the facilities at the
Yeah.
time. As
Yeah.
a 14-year-old, right? And then the other thing was I had a really great tour guide. A fella, I still remember, Andy Allen, who was, I guess, a year or two ahead of us. I think 1 year ahead of us. And he was a great tour guide, and that was a big deal to me at the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wanted to be Andy Allen. I thought,
he made an impression on you, huh?
Yeah, for sure.
So what was going on for you that you were kind of this disgruntled 13-year-old, I guess?
But, who knows? I mean, I wasn't much good at sports, didn't have a lot of friends or good friends, wasn't, school was not that interesting to me. I mean, I was doing well in school, but it wasn't something I, was excited about at all. I don't think that's like remotely unusual for an 8th grader, but I think my parents, had an idea that I could do better in a more academically rigorous environment. I don't think we started out looking for a boarding school, but I remember turning it that way because this was, again, not really good thinking on my part, but at the time I thought like day schools, like that sounds crazy. Like the idea that I would drive 30 minutes to go to some school and then 30 minutes back, I'd have like even less friends than I had now.
Yeah.
It seemed to me, which of course is not the way it works at all, right? I mean, but my kids go to, day schools and kids commute in from wherever, and it's different. But
Right.
maybe, we all have phones and such now. The kids are those crazy kids and their social media. It's a lot more connected.
Sure.
Anyhow, it's that's how I got, that's how I ended up there. We ended up looking at boarding schools, and I marched around with my dad to various schools, and I ended up choosing Exeter, and and here we are.
Yeah, here we are. I know, it's kind of amazing, man. Time goes by so fast. It's hard to accept. I do not want to accept that we are in our 50s. I do not want to accept this.
I
this
am
truth.
still 29.
Yes, you look it too. So that's interesting. Did you like look at any others that you thought you would rather go to, or was Exeter?
I looked at Exeter and Andover, Deerfield and Choate, and I think I ultimately was deciding between Exeter and Deerfield. I liked Deerfield a lot, and I think as I recall, a factor for me at the time was Deerfield was still at that moment an all boys school, but it was about to transition to co-ed. And I decided, again, for no particularly very good reason, certainly not one based on experience or knowledge, but I just decided it would not be a great thing to be at a school in that transitional period.
I remember that. I used to go to Deerfield for debate team tournaments and stuff, and I remember thinking, "Wow, God, this is a beautiful place." It struck me also. Deerfield was like gorgeous, kind of isolated and rural, like even more than Exeter by a lot.
Yeah.
But I do remember that in the air that they had just gotten around to coeducating in the early 90s, which is kind of nuts. I guess it was the late 80s. I don't know. Kind of nuts to think of that they waited that long. I think you made the right choice. Definitely. I think you definitely.
Yeah, no, me too, in hindsight, for sure.
Yeah, of course you did.
Wasn't obvious at the time, but yes.
Oh, man, definitely made the right choice. So catch us up on what happened. So what happened to Matt McGill after we left Exeter in 92?
I went to Dartmouth College. Graduated in 1996. I had a great time at Dartmouth, probably too good for my own good. Coming out of Exeter, I had decided that I wanted to go to a school that was kind of fun forward. I was looking for something that was going to be less, I would perceive to be less academically, hence to have more social outlets than Exeter permitted. Dartmouth seemed to fit that bill, and I had an awesome time at Dartmouth. And after that, I worked for 1 year in Boston at Fleet Bank, and while in college, I knew I wanted to go to law school.
Mm-hmm.
My junior year in college, I took the LSAT, and I was just so worked up about it that I kind of like cracked under my self-imposed pressure. And when I, got too many questions wrong, or I thought I had gotten them wrong in one of the sections and then another section, and I just knew I wasn't going to get the score that I thought I needed, I just, broke all my pencils and stormed out.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Right in the middle of the exam, you just
it's like, I'm out of here.
Yeah. Really?
I was not. So then I didn't, I had to come back to it. Then, so while I was working in Boston, I, came back up to Dartmouth on one, Friday night or whatever day the test was the day before. And I did a couple practice sections in the library, and then just went in. I went in just saying, like, I just got to take the test, finish the test, and we'll just see where it goes. And I ended up doing really well, better than I had ever done. It's like an interesting life lesson in like the benefits that of just having a relaxed state of mind can have on your performance. But I did fine. And then so I did well enough that suddenly I had great options that I didn't previously think were available options for law school. So I applied to I applied only to 4 law schools, and got into 3 of them, and one was Harvard and one was Stanford. Was deciding between those two, and on April 1st, 1997, snowed 42 inches in Boston, and my roommates and I, we were actually moved that day. We had to move in a snowstorm. And then 4 days later, I was out at Stanford. It was 85 and sunny. And I was like, this is a no-brainer. No-brainer. So I went to Stanford and had 3 great years there. Came back to the East Coast. I worked coming out of law school. I took a clerkship with a judge on the Federal Court of Appeals in New York, a judge named Joe McLaughlin. And then from there, and this was really kind of the pivotal point in my career, while there, shortly after 9/11, I got news that I had been accepted as what is called the Bristow Fellowship, which is a 1-year position in the Solicitor General's office in the Department of Justice in Washington. So I moved to Washington in 2002, and started that job in the fall of 2002. And I was, while there, that I was working for the then Solicitor General, Ted Olson. And for the listeners or viewers, the Solicitor General's office handles all of the Supreme Court litigation for the United States.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. So they handle any case that the United States is involved in the Supreme Court goes through the SG's office.
Interesting.
It was an amazing year to get to watch a bunch of cases at close range, in the Supreme Court, work with really exceptional lawyers who were in the office at that time, many of whom have gone on to great things and become judges themselves.
Yeah.
And while I was there, this fellow named John Roberts after a long delay, was confirmed as a judge on the Court of Appeals in DC. I went and clerked for him after my job in the SG's office. I was his first law clerk. And that at the time looked like kind of a sideways move for me. It was not intuitive, even to myself. It wasn't clear that this is a job that I should take. It did feel very, very sideways to me. But I reasoned at that time that, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world for me to work for this then brand new judge who is likely to be a judge in DC for 30 years or more so to have that kind of guy in my corner for the duration of my legal career, like, that's not a bad thing. And then a year later, he got a big promotion.
Yes, he did.
Yeah. So my resume got a promotion, but through no work of my own. And then from there I went, I finished that job, and Ted Olson recruited me back to his law firm of Gibson, Dunn and Crutcher. And I've been there now for 20 years.
That's so cool. I have a lot of questions about your profession, actually, and probably a lot of Exonians have thought about this because we're so hyper articulate, right? We're so we talk a lot, right? We write a lot.
Mm.
So I've never really truly understood the whole pathway, or what the law life was like, or any of the things that you're just talking about here in terms of clerking, or what even clerking means, for example. What was your thought process about becoming a lawyer? And when you got out of law school, and by the way, when was that? What year did you leave?
I got out of law school in 2000.
Okay. And it feels like, starting with your dad, correct me if I'm wrong, but you kind of always sort of knew you wanted to go to law school. There's always something in the air for you, and you kind of had a feel for this?
Yeah. I mean, certainly my dad being a lawyer made the legal profession was not like a mystery to me. Dad, he certainly didn't pressure us to become lawyers, but he didn't discourage us either. And my brother is a lawyer too.
I see.
So, what I definitely was interested in, in my dad's work. My dad had a couple of First Amendment constitutional cases, and he would send me the briefs that he had filed in, this court. I would get them in the mail, and our, PEA box 665 was, I think, mine. And so I would, I definitely had some interest in it. When I got to Dartmouth, maybe a little bit of regret there. I mean, just that I was almost quite narrowly focused, not so much on a pre-law, course of study at Dartmouth, but I definitely did not do things that were far from my comfort zone. Right. And what I got out of Exeter, among other things, but some very important skills that I got out of Exeter, and I think a lot of us got out of Exeter, was just how to read and read things critically and analyze text. And we learned also how to write. And so when I got to Dartmouth, I felt like, reading and writing, this is not hard. I mean, I had 5 classes at Exeter. At Dartmouth, I had 3. I felt like my workload had been cut by 40%, and and I would watch, how some of my, friends at Dartmouth would like struggle, like writing papers. Writing papers was just not a problem for me. And so I discovered that this was like, well, this was a pathway to excel academically at Dartmouth is stick to classes where there are papers
I see.
and avoid hard sciences, right, that were exam based. So I have like that little tinge of regret for not stretching myself a little bit in some of those, science technology areas. But anyway, I stuck to what, I was good at, which was
Right.
reading and writing,
Right.
and took more kind of law oriented classes at Dartmouth. We were kind of, when I was there towards the end of my time at Dartmouth, this fellow came in to be the new provost, a fellow named Lee Bollinger, who had been a professor at the University of Michigan Law School, and he was something of a First Amendment scholar. So he taught a class at Dartmouth that he ran like a law school class.
Interesting.
So law school classes, not many do it this way anymore, but back in the day, there was the old movie, The Paper Chase, but it's called like the Socratic method, where the teacher asks a question and calls on some student in the classroom, more or less at random, and they have to answer like right there on the spot. It's not, teacher asks a question and, show of hands who wants to answer it. It's, anybody could be called on at any given time. And he ran the class that way, and I thought, oh, this is great. I mean, it was engaging and, and it was in a little bit closer to the Harkness method, a little bit, than that we had experienced at Exeter. It was a big, what a drag to go from the Harkness, discussions to lecture format instruction.
Totally.
Right?
Huge drag.
And this was the Socratic method is kind of like a hybrid. It's quite question based pedagogy with enforced participation, but it's a little less organic than like the discussions that could happen in a Harkness session.
So did you always want to be a lawyer? And
I don't know what always means, but I don't recall seriously considering much else. At some point, I think when I was like a young kid, I would joke with my parents, that I was going to be a corporate raider, or like Ivan Boesky or some other an arbitrageur, but I never really seriously considered anything else. I did have it in my head coming to the end of my time at Dartmouth that I wanted to work for a couple of years before going to law school. This was like, so I did the corporate recruiting thing and ended up getting this job at Fleet Bank doing real estate loan syndications. I mean, I think I was in the job for like 6 days before I was like, oh, this was a terrible mistake. Yeah, it's like work stinks. How get me back to school as soon as possible. Right. And, so that's what got me back to sit down for the LSAT so I could get back to school.
There you go. So was there anything about your time at Exeter that shaped your path towards the law, or would you say it's mostly this course with Lee Bollinger at Dartmouth?
I mean, other than, having to advocate for my Main Street colleagues in various disciplinary proceedings, which was probably my first unpaid pro bono representations.
Okay.
They, I think, I think the Harkness method, brings that out of us a little bit. It puts us in a legal mind frame, and not so much about law, but how to make, everybody's got to make an argument on the fly, right? And the argument might not be very intricate or complex, but if you've got a point to make, that's whether it's in English or in math or physics. I mean, we learned how to express ourselves verbally,
right?
Clearly. And so it that you come into having that skill set is something that translates well into the legal realm.
Right. So after law school and the time in the Solicitor General's office with Ted Olson, just explain a couple of things to me. So for people that don't know, Ted Olson is kind of a big deal, right, in the legal profession. And
Yeah.
I saw that you had posted 3 months ago on LinkedIn a tribute to Ted and the work you'd done together. And it's clear he was a mentor and someone you had deep respect for. I remember seeing him on the news pretty often. And this isn't the best thing to remember, but I think at 9/11, unfortunately, I believe his wife was on one of those planes.
Yep. Remember, his wife was on Flight 77 that flew into the Pentagon.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I had I would been a summer associate. So I had a summer job at Gibson Dunn before that in 1999. So I knew who Ted was. I knew who he was when he litigated Bush versus Gore for George Bush. And that's how America got to know Ted, I think, for the most part. I mean, he was a big deal in legal circles before then, but that's where he became kind of a famous person, was when he represented George Bush in Bush versus Gore and won that case. And then he became, in some ways, like the administration's symbol of grief in 9/11. And he was willing to talk about that and what that day was like for him and at the time. And, and 9/11, September 11th was also Ted's birthday. And his wife was on that plane because she had decided to stay that night so that they could have breakfast together before she flew out to Los Angeles. And so she boarded the plane on the morning of the 11th instead of the afternoon of the 10th.
Unbelievable. Did you get to know him on a personal level?
For sure. I mean, he was not during the 9/11 period, right? But I got to know him a little bit when he was Solicitor General, but certainly over 20 years at the law firm, I mean, he was a cherished mentor and a great friend. He came to, my wedding in 2006, and, he was, a major presence in not just my career, but our family lives for 20 years until pretty recently.
So when you started getting the Solicitor General experience, was that the beginning of your exposure to Supreme Court?
Yes. I mean, yes, it was like my first opportunity to go and watch cases get argued, and to see how cases get briefed and the written work gets put together. So that was when I really decided I wanted to try myself to focus on appellate litigation and maybe one day myself get to argue some cases in the Supreme Court. That was the hope.
And what's the structure of the court system? Educate us on that.
So we have federal courts and we have state courts. So, if you're in California, most of your cases are going to be in state courts there, but there are cases that arise under federal law will be handled in federal courts. There are 93 judicial districts in the United States, at least one in each state. So those are the trial courts. So those are called district courts. And judgments of district courts can be appealed to what are called courts of appeals, shockingly.
Yeah.
And they are organized in what they call circuits. And so there are 13 circuit courts. They're with the exception of one, they are geographically organized. They're not equal in size, but so the Ninth Circuit is giant. It covers from Washington all the way down to Arizona and all the way back up to Montana. And the Second Circuit is just New York, Vermont, and Connecticut. So I clerked for a judge on the Second Circuit in New York. And then I clerked on the DC Circuit, which is in Washington, DC. And judgments of the Court of Appeals can be appealed to the Supreme Court of the United States. The Supreme Court gets each year about 10,000 requests to hear a case, and it hears about 65 to 70 cases a year. So if you get to convince the Supreme Court to take your case, you in some ways have won the judicial lottery. And so I've been fortunate over the course of my career. I've probably been involved in 30 cases or so in the Supreme Court, and just on Monday argued my fifth case there. And that's a little bit about how the judicial system is organized.
Yeah, that helps. So when you go out in front of the Supreme Court to argue, what is that like, Matt? Explain that, describe that to us.
Yeah, I mean, it's changed a little bit over time. It's nerve-wracking. I mean, you've got 9 incredibly smart people. So you think about a Harkness discussion or a Socratic method, 9 very, very bright people drilling you with questions on, the weakest aspects of your case and argument. The first case I argued was in 2016. And in that case, I think I started my argument, maybe got one sentence out before Justice Sotomayor started asking me questions. He asked me 33 questions in 12 minutes. It was like Jeopardy. I mean, she just like picking questions off the board and just firing away at me and parrying and battling back and forth with her in that case. Now it's since COVID, they've changed the format a little bit where you now get 1 or 2 minutes uninterrupted to start, and the justices have an opportunity at the end of the allotted time for the argument to each ask additional questions. So that means the justices now are less apt to be fighting to get their questions in. So there's a little less competition, or there's a little more opportunity to get your points out before a new question comes in. But it's not like when you say like we're making an oral argument in the Supreme Court, it's not like you stand up there and deliver the Gettysburg Address or something like that. It's nothing like that at all. You'll get 1 minute or so, and then they'll start asking questions. And if your case is, difficult, you could get a lot of questions. I had a case I argued a couple of years ago. I mean, I was up there for like, I don't know, an hour and a half. I mean, and I got a lot of questions.
How do you prepare to argue in front of the Supreme Court?
Yeah, I mean, you read everything, of course, and the two big things in it, other than reading and studying, right? Think of it as studying for an exam, and then we do practice exams. So we have what we call moot courts, and so I'll get, 3 or 4 of my colleagues who, act as judges, and, we do it in roll, and I will start my argument and they'll start firing away questions, and they try to make it, much, much worse than the real thing. So for my most recent argument, I did 4 moot courts. So you study for the exam. I did 4 practice exams, and then you study some more.
Are you in there in front of the 9 judges by yourself, or is there support around you? From your side?
Not a lot. I mean, so you're standing up there at the podium, you're by yourself. You can, my most recent case, I had one fella with me. We're not, they're not passing notes or anything like that.
So,
I mean, there's no help coming. You are kind of on your own. I mean, if I needed, some citation to something, I could have maybe looked to my right and maybe he would have passed up a note. But it's very, very infrequent. I don't know that I've ever done that. Looked for help. There's no phone a friend or anything like that. It is a little bit lonely up there.
Can you tell us, I don't know how much you're allowed to say about any of this, but are you allowed to tell us about this most recent case?
Sure. I mean, the case is I represent investors who had a company in India that entered into a contract with an India state-owned entity. This was almost 2 decades ago now, but it had to do with satellite-based telecommunications. And the company in India, they walked away from the deal and they went and had an arbitration about it. And my clients won. The arbitration got a big arbitration award. And so now we're trying to enforce that arbitration award. And the question in this case was whether we could get jurisdiction to bring this company, for this India state-owned entity, into court, into the United States. So
And
whether we
why?
had the power to basically summon them into a U.S. court.
I see.
Yeah,
I see.
that's what the question.
And so that was the key legal question. And so out of the 10,000 requests, and if this is one of 65 or 70 this year, what was the core reason that they would take the case?
So what the Supreme Court looks for are often what they call circuit splits. So we talked about how those the courts of appeals are divided into circuits. So if you have a situation where one circuit decides a question one way and the other circuit decides a question another way, or they reach divergent outcomes on the same question of federal law, then the Supreme Court kind of settles that dispute among the circuits. And in my case, the Ninth Circuit reached a conclusion that was divergent from that of other circuits.
What are some other big cases that you've done in front of the Supreme Court?
These are not cases that I've argued, but they're ones that certainly people know about. I worked the California marriage equality case, which went into the Supreme Court books as Hollingsworth versus Perry, but we called it the Proposition 8 case. So we handled that. There's a case called Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission, which has some notoriety that we did for Citizens United in 2010. Yeah. I handled the sports betting case for the state of New Jersey, which has resulted in the legalization of sports betting in much of America. So those are the three big ones.
Yeah. And yeah, so okay, so I've been wanting to ask you this. It's amazing to hear about your career. It's really inspiring when you think about Exeter and this whole value around knowledge and goodness, non-SIBI. The work you've been doing really contributes to the public good, especially when you talk about marriage equality. Does that strike you as one of the most significant things you've done in your career so far?
Sure. That case, meant a lot, still does, to it means everything to a lot of people. Right. So, I mean, if you think about that case and just the impact it had across the country for gay and lesbian Americans, it was a very, very big deal. And so that was a very meaningful case. The sports betting case, it didn't change lives in quite the same, way, but it certainly has changed, change things in America. It's changed the way we consume sports. It's changed the whole economics of sports. So that's been a great, that was a great case too.
Yeah. Is it the intellectual pursuit of these cases that engages you the most, or is it the moral authority around the case that drives you?
I think both, right? I mean, it's not every case that you get that has a real moral position to it, and I don't mean that lightly. Like I believe my clients are right about a lot of things, but I wouldn't say a case that's really at the end of the day about money rises to that level of that more like great moral issues of the day. But so when you get those cases, right, they're great opportunities, and certainly I fully embrace that aspect of them when they arise. But almost every case has great intellectual engagement for me, and that's what drew me into the field, and that's what keeps me in it for sure.
It sounds extremely interesting. It sounds like you're studying for a living and reading and reading for a living.
I mean, you can, right? And I mean, one of the big challenges for me is getting enough time to study. I mean, when I have one of these arguments, it's, I've got a bunch of other cases and other clients and conference calls and meetings and stuff. But I need to be locked away and study. and to find that time in, the modern legal practice can be challenging.
Yeah. Do you do a lot of nights and weekends? Do you do like 80, 90-hour weeks as a regular thing?
I mean, I try not to do quite that much anymore. It's not really sustainable for me. Yeah, I mean, in the week before a Supreme Court argument, it's a lot of midnight oil. It does harken back to the Exeter
Right.
days. We learned that we could, we learned at an early age, that studying and pulling all-nighters and things like that. I mean, that was, it's kind of shocking when you look back at what we did back then.
It is. So it's like you're telling me like this goes back to History 333 paper, basically, right?
Yeah,
And all the way to the Supreme Court from 333.
right. And, it's back then, like the 333 paper, like, geez, that was like it seemed like an impossible hill to climb, right? And now it doesn't look like that
Yeah.
big a deal,
Yeah. Right.
but it was at the time.
Right. Right. So I don't get often the opportunity to talk to someone that's doing the kind of stuff that you're doing. And when you talk about having worked on Citizens United, that strikes me as the one thing. And this gets into this whole line of questions I have around what do you think is going on in America today? And what do you think is going on with the Supreme Court? Because it feels like the culture around the Supreme Court has changed a lot. And the Citizens United in particular seems to have really changed America. So you talk about your dad being a liberal. I can't help it. I'm in California.
Yeah.
I live in California, right? So I'm definitely that, probably, if not more. I look at, because I'm as a layman, not a lawyer, and certainly nobody close to the Supreme Court, I keep hearing Citizens United was the turning point for America.
Yeah, I think Citizens United's that's wrong, and it's really misunderstood.
Okay.
Yeah, I think all Citizens United stands for is the idea that an entity that is organized as a corporation can spend its own money to engage in political speech.
Okay.
That's all. That happens, that's useful for lots of ways. If people want to band together and form an organization to advocate for this or that candidate or for this or that issue, you can use a corporate vehicle to do that. And that's in fact what Citizens United is. It's like an advocacy organization. And the idea that was, the boogeyman that was, trotted out at the time was that corporate America was going to, deploy their treasuries to influence the outcome of elections. And that just, hasn't happened. But even if it did, I don't see what the problem is. And this is like goes back to, what we learned at Exeter. Like, I don't have a problem with there being more speech. I don't have a problem with people articulating ideas. I don't have a problem with corporations articulating ideas. It's up to us as the consumers of the, media, to critically analyze and understand who the source is and who the speaker is, and you reach your own conclusions.
I see.
Kind of the undergirding a lot of the criticism of Citizens United is this idea that voters are sheep and they just do what the commercials tell them to do, and I don't believe that's ever been true.
I see.
In terms of the culture of the Supreme Court, I think what has I think it's a little bit unfortunate that the public has come to view the court as a political body rather than judges doing their best to decide the case in front of them. And I really do think that is what is going on in at least the vast majority of cases.
Okay.
I think Bush versus Gore, is the case that people point to as saying, like, look, the Republicans voted for George Bush. That's actually not entirely true because John Paul Stevens was, a Republican and he voted for Gore. But, it's also, it overlooks that it was a 7-2 decision on, most of the case and not a 5-4. It corrodes the public's respect for the rule of law when they view judges' decisions as based on their political preferences rather than the law.
Right. For sure.
So if you think that the judge is reaching a conclusion based not on the law, but based on their political views, then, well, we should elect our judges just like we elect everybody else.
Yeah.
But that's not what is happening. And at least, historically, the Supreme Court has been an extremely important, counter-majoritarian protector of rights and liberties. I think, when I think the Supreme Court still, has that in it and can still play that role. That we're living in a interesting time where, I think we may see types of clashes between the judicial branch and the executive branch. There's one that's kind of brewing right now about the USAID funding, and there's a judge in Washington, D.C. who's ordered the State Department to turn back on the funding. And the Trump administration, at least as of yesterday, was saying it's not going to do it. So, we'll see how that plays out. But it would be a bad result if we don't have, at the end of all this, respect for the rule of law. Because if without that, we're really we are really just going to be it'll be democratic in a way, but it's going to be you're at the mercy of your elected officials at that point.
The stories you've been telling about your work with the Supreme Court matter are just incredible. So thank you so much for sharing your experience. What I have seen just as an average American consuming the news over the last year and a half, 2 years during the election process, and even going back several years back to the first Trump administration, my impression was that the Supreme Court was very politicized and that it does go back to the Citizens United decision and the allowing of big money into politics. And I'm curious what you think about that, even with what you've just said about how it might be somewhat misunderstood. Like, do you think that the path we've taken was a sort of a hard right towards a politicized system of government, particularly with the third branch, the courts, particularly here?
We'll take that in two parts, right? That with the Supreme Court, I think that really it's not politicized. I think they have if you look at the Supreme Court's cases, they have, 60 or 65 to 70 cases a year. More than, maybe 40% of them are decided 9-0 or 8-1. It's pretty rare. Like only a fraction of them are 5-4. And most of those the public knows nothing about. Doesn't matter, right? But they do reflect, those divisions do reflect different philosophies about interpreting legal texts. They reflect different philosophies about, the role of how judges approach constitutional questions. But these are, legal disputes. They're not so much political ones. Now, they do tend to align with political parties, in such that, the Republicans are seen as wanting to appoint so-called, conservative judges because the Republican, political elected officials think that these conservative judges are more likely to reach outcomes that align with their political preferences. So, but I think that is different than saying that the judges themselves are politicized. I mean, it's a subtle distinction, but I think it matters a lot in terms of how the judges are doing their work. In terms of your critique about big money in politics, and I don't know. So I guess there's 2 points about that. Is that one is the big money in election politics today is coming from people, and not nobody, but it's long been the law that individuals can spend as much as they want trying to advocate for a candidate. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Mm.
That's what the First Amendment means.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be, I think, a bad result if we had what amounted to some kind of equality principle where everybody gets a certain amount of speech and I think we have to, what it does mean, however, is that we as the public have to be discerning and have to be vigilant and critical thinkers. And they fundamentally, I think most of those who are critiquing big money in politics, are question the viability of that, really. I think a lot of people don't believe in voters to make decisions that are, informed.
How do you feel about Elon Musk spending $245 million on Trump's reelection?
I think it's fine. I mean, what did it change? Whose vote did it change? I don't know, right? I mean, he got a lot of airtime that advocated in favor of Donald Trump and advocated against Kamala Harris. Did that influence people? Maybe. But did it influence them inappropriately, or did it do so in a way? Did the best ideas not win out? If so, why? I don't have a problem. I mean, I just don't have a problem with the more speech.
I see what you mean. But does money equate to speech per se?
Well, that's what we're talking about when we say when Elon Musk spent $245 million. What we mean is he bought television ads, or he paid for mailers, or he paid for get out the vote canvassers.
Yeah, right. And so then, in other words, whoever's receiving that direct mail needs to be able to tell if he's lying or not.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to be a like the voters have to be critical thinkers, and that's true whether the sender is Elon Musk or the sender is the candidate themselves.
Sure. Question there, though. What about that situation where I think he was doing like $1 million reward for people who were showing up, having just sort of registered to vote? Is that not crossing the line?
So that was the $1 million lottery or something. I didn't. It wasn't. I mean, I know it was investigated, and I think ultimately it was determined that it was lawful.
Right.
I don't know. I think it brought more notoriety than any actual influence on the election.
Yeah.
But
yeah. And I appreciate you just giving us your thoughts and opinions on this, because these are just in the popular sort of news consuming mind of the average American, what we have big questions about, if I can speak for the larger group of people who consume news. It certainly kept me wondering. And I just curious about this whole thing around originalists as an example. So if I look at, the most recent, the Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett appointments, and I think about sort of this reversal on abortion, for example, is one troubling thing, to take away a right that women have had for 50 years to just be able to decide what to do for their own bodies. That one in particular, and the reversal of a precedent that's been a constitutionally approved right on the basis of this was never originally in the Constitution, so we're just going to revert. That concerns me a lot, right? I have 2 daughters. You have a daughter, right?
So look, I get it. I get it. And so, the Dobbs decision, couple thoughts on that is that first is, so what did Dobbs do? Dobbs overruled Roe versus Wade. So nobody on the court in 22, I think, when that was decided, none of the 9 justices was saying that Roe versus Wade was correctly decided. Nobody. The argument for keeping Roe versus Wade was that it's been around for a long time and we've kind of come to rely on it, and it would be a really bad thing to take it away. And look, that argument has a lot of force. It didn't carry the day. That means that, but what it means is not that the right is gone, the federal right is gone, but now people have to fight it out on the state level, and that's leading to some very difficult outcomes for people in certain states. But where you live in California, Roe versus Wade was not a big deal for you guys. I mean, it's because you're well protected under state law. It's not an issue. And so this is, it's an issue it's a political issue in the states. And one way to look at this, and I'm not saying it's the right way, but one way to look at this is that, is this is an issue that elected officials, people elect legislators to decide issues like this. And if they elect bad people or people who don't align with their preferences, then, you're going to get results that you don't like. I think elections have consequences. We're seeing that for sure right now. I mean, and it's I don't know that we're going to see anything. I think what happened with Dobbs is we're not going to see too many cases like that where, so we'll see where it goes from here. My sense is that over time, and it will take time, but over time, the right will be restored on a state by state basis. And it's going to be fought out in the legislatures over time, just as, other practices, not to say it's anything like the other, but like sports betting, this is obviously affects people in an entirely different way. I'm not saying that they're equivalent, but you just look at how I just look at that as an example of how things can change across a wide number of states pretty quickly.
Yeah. With regard to something like gun rights, though, how do you feel like where we are today with something like an originalist interpretation, where something like the right to arms?
I mean, this is I don't think that there is so we're talking about the Second Amendment, which includes, which says a well-regulated militia being, necessary, the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And the question has been, what does that allow? And in the United States, and the answer from the Supreme Court has been that it means that individuals have the right to own firearms. What about, I think I understand that a lot of people think that that's not necessary. Nobody's saying you have to own a firearm, of course. What they're complaining about is that other people have the right to own a firearm. And, if it's a really big problem that other people have the right to own guns, then the Constitution does provide a method to amend the Constitution. It's happened 29 times.
Right.
But it does require, by design, very significant public support.
That's interesting. Yeah.
So it's not an easy thing to do, but it has happened.
Sure.
So if we really feel strongly about it, then that's what we need to do to advocate around it. You can disagree with what the Supreme Court concluded, and I'm not a Second Amendment scholar, so I'm not, I don't have a really very informed view about who's right and who's wrong here, but I do think that is a great example of judges applying judicial philosophies rather than political preferences.
Yeah, I know from there, but isn't it also just like some people would say, and I guess the question is, I'm not sure what they call this school of thought, but the idea that in the 1780s, we were talking about a musket, and now we're talking about a machine gun that can do 1,000 rounds in a minute.
Yeah, but there's no right to keep and bear a machine gun.
Exactly.
I think, so that at least that limit has not been questioned, right?
That's what I'm talking.
You don't have a right. You do not have a constitutional right to a bazooka or a howitzer. So no, these are like the frontiers. Is like, so where do you? And a lot of legal issues and questions come to, where do you draw the line? And it's not always clear, and it's not always neat. And as soon as you draw the line, somebody can design something that gets really close to the line and is designed to impeach the line in some way, right? You can, if you're going to say, well, this is a hypothetical scenario, but if the court decision had been, you have a right to a handgun, and now somebody invents, oh, you've got a right to a handgun. Well, now I've got a nuclear handgun. Is that within the rule? These are the types of
Yeah. I mean, these hard questions I'm asking for your opinions on, because I mean, nobody knows what the right answer is for sure, and it is very difficult. But it just seems like the fabric of the country has been an evolutionary one and a kind of adaptation to changing mores. And there was a time in the 1780s when they didn't think a woman should have the right to vote, right?
Yeah, I mean, but that was one of the amendments to the Constitution. That's in,
Yeah.
there's a lot of things in the Constitution,
Right.
like the 3/5 clause.
Yeah. Right.
So, the Constitution from time to time has needed to be amended. And
Yeah.
maybe that's, for some of these things, maybe that's going to have to be, right? Maybe that's going to be an issue for, reproductive rights and things like that over time.
Right. Yeah. I get what you're saying.
I'm going to have to call it here
Yeah.
for
Okay.
now.
Right on.
And I don't have to get on another time. I mean, this is so good.
Matt, it might be worth it because this is exactly the kind of material I think the audience is going to learn from and grow
I'm happy
from.
to. Yeah, totally. Your call. I'm going to have to hop to this other thing.
Yeah.
Let's, if you want to, I'm game. And now we've got the tech sorted. And I'll have my phone fully charged next time.
Yeah. Because I want to also give you a chance to talk about some other stuff.
Yeah, let's do it. All right.
Yeah.
That
Cool,
sounds
buddy.
great.
All
Thank
right.
you.
All right.
Talk soon, man.
Take care. Bye. Thanks a lot. Bye.